Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into some fascinating research and expert opinions on the psychology of fame and influence.
Yeah, it's interesting, we always see the glamorous side of fame, but we rarely stop to think about the psychological impact it has.
It's a bit like a two-sided coin, isn't it? Shiny and appealing on the surface, but with a potential darker side. Some of our sources even describe it as a double-edged sword.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I find so intriguing about this deep dive. We get to go beyond the surface, really explore those psychological forces at play. For example, one article from Psychology Today uses this powerful analogy. It describes fame as being like a cage, or like a toy in a shop window, always being watched and judged.
Wow, that's a really striking image.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how fame could actually lead to feelings of isolation, even a lack of privacy, even though famous people are seemingly always surrounded by others.
Absolutely, and that illusion of closeness with fans is something that's discussed in the article from Saybrook University. But at the same time, it can also make celebrities feel like they're constantly on display, which can be very isolating.
Right, it's almost as if fame distorts the way people see you, both the public and maybe even yourself.
For sure.
All of this makes me wonder why people want to be famous in the first place. What is it about fame that's so alluring? What are some of the psychological motivations behind fame seeking?
Well, one theory is that people are drawn to fame because it offers a sense of validation, a sense of belonging even. The Saybrook University article actually compares it to being a member of an exclusive club. It makes you feel special, important.
I can see that. It's a bit like getting a trophy or a gold star. It feels good to be recognized and admired by others. Are there any other reasons, though?
Yes. Fame can also be a powerful motivator because of the rewards it brings. Money, attention. The article, The Psychology Behind Fame, explains that this is called extrinsic motivation.
So it's like you're motivated by the outcome, not the process itself.
Right. It's like when you do something just because you'll get a reward for it, even if you don't actually enjoy the activity.
So it's easy to see how that could be a slippery slope. What happens when the thrill of fame fades? Or when the rewards aren't as satisfying as you thought they'd be?
That's when things can get really tricky. Fame doesn't always bring happiness or fulfillment. In fact, several of the sources point to many psychological pressures that come with being famous.
Makes sense. I can imagine that the constant scrutiny, the pressure to maintain a perfect image, it would take a toll on anyone's mental health.
Absolutely. And the article from Medium specifically mentions the link between fame and self-destructive behaviors. Things like substance abuse. It's like some people turn to drugs or alcohol as a way to cope with the stress and anxiety of being in the public eye.
It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? Fame can lead to stress, which can lead to unhealthy coping mechanisms, which can then further damage your mental health and reputation. It's like dominoes.
Right. And it's not just substance abuse. The Medium article also highlights how the pressure to look perfect can contribute to eating disorders and body image issues.
It's like fame magnifies the pressures that a lot of people already face in our society, especially around appearance.
Exactly. And that's precisely why it's so important to talk about the psychological side of fame. Because it's not always glamorous or easy. In fact, it can be incredibly challenging, even for those who seem to have it all.
So we've talked about how fame can be isolating and how it can lead to these unhealthy behaviors. Are there any specific examples of celebrities who have struggled with the psychological impact of fame?
Well, the Psychology Today article actually highlights a few. People like Elvis Presley and Cobain. They both struggled with the pressures of fame and both ultimately resorted to drugs as a way to cope.
Those are really tragic stories. And it makes you think about how fame can sometimes feel like a curse rather than a blessing.
Yeah.
Are there any celebrities, though, who seem to be handling fame well? Are there insights into how they manage the pressures, how they maintain their mental well-being?
That's a great question. And while there's no magic formula, some of our sources do offer some helpful strategies. For example, the Saybrook University article emphasizes the importance of psychological support. Therapy can provide a safe space for celebrities to process their experiences and develop those coping mechanisms for dealing with the unique challenges of fame.
So it's like having a trusted guide to help navigate the emotional roller coaster that comes with fame. But therapy isn't the only solution.
Right.
Right.
The article also highlights the importance of maintaining genuine relationships, those that aren't based on fame or professional gain. Having a strong support system of family and friends, people who love you for who you are not, for your celebrity status, can be incredibly grounding.
It's like having a safe haven, a place where you can just be yourself without the pressure of the spotlight.
Exactly. And that's something that we can all relate to, whether we're famous or not. Having genuine connections in our lives is just essential for our well-being.
That's a really great point. I think it's interesting that the lessons we can learn from the psychology of fame are actually relevant to all of us.
Absolutely. Understanding the pitfalls of seeking external validation, the importance of nurturing authentic relationships, and the need for self-care, those are all valuable insights for everyone, regardless of their level of fame or influence.
It's like this deep dive is giving us a new perspective, not just on celebrity culture, but also on our own relationship with success, happiness, and well-being.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, is there a way to achieve and maintain fame without succumbing to those psychological pitfalls?
That's a really interesting question. Maybe those who don't actively seek fame are better equipped to handle it when it comes their way.
Right.
But what about those who do chase fame? Are they destined to struggle?
Let's explore that further. There's some research that might shed some light on this.
Great, but first, let's take a quick break. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were talking about whether it's possible to achieve fame without falling prey to its downsides.
Yeah, and there's actually a study mentioned in a research article by Mark Schaller that might offer some clues. It focused on 3 famous figures, Kurt Cobain, Cole Porter, and John Cheever. All 3 achieved significant fame, but all 3 also struggled with substance abuse.
Okay, so what did this study find?
Well, researchers analyzed their writings, and they noticed something really interesting. After achieving fame, all 3 men started using more first-person singular pronouns like I and me in their work.
Interesting. So they were basically talking about themselves more after they became famous.
Exactly. And the researchers suggest that this might be linked to an increase in self-consciousness. It's like all that scrutiny, all that attention made them hyper-aware of themselves, which could have contributed to their struggles.
That makes sense. I mean, imagine constantly being watched and judged. It would be hard not to become more self-conscious. But how does that connect to substance abuse?
Well, the study proposes that the negative feelings associated with that kind of chronic self-consciousness might lead people to seek escape or to try and numb those feelings.
So turning to drugs or alcohol as a way to cope with the internal pressure of fame.
Exactly. And it becomes a vicious cycle because often those behaviors just worsen the problem, leading to further isolation and distress.
It's tragic, but it also raises a really important question. Are there ways for celebrities or anyone in the public eye to navigate fame in a healthier way?
Yes. And thankfully, some of our sources offer some insights into that. The Saybrook University article emphasizes the importance of building a strong sense of self-worth, one that isn't dependent on external validation. It's like having a solid foundation that can withstand the ups and downs of fame.
So it's about valuing yourself for who you are, not for what you achieve or how many people admire you.
Exactly. And this also ties into the idea of pursuing your passions for intrinsic reasons, not just for the fame or fortune they might bring.
It's doing what you love because it brings you joy and fulfillment, not because you're chasing the spotlight.
Right, and this actually brings us to another interesting point from the Chris John Espadero outline. It contrasts the pursuit of fame with the pursuit of wealth.
Okay, how so? What's the difference?
Well, the outline suggests that fame-seeking is often driven by a need for social approval, attention, while those who pursue wealth tend to be more focused on hard work, future goals, and they often have strong family support.
So it's like fame seekers are looking outward for validation, while wealth seekers are more internally focused on building something tangible.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it raises a fascinating question. Could the underlying motivations behind our aspirations actually determine whether they ultimately lead to fulfillment?
It really makes you think about what truly drives us as individuals. Are we chasing external rewards, or are we seeking inner satisfaction?
Exactly. And that's a question worth pondering for all of us, whether we're in the public eye or not.
So we've explored the allure of fame, the psychological pressures it can bring, and even some strategies for navigating it in a healthier way. But there's one more aspect of fame we haven't really touched on yet. Its power to influence.
Ah, yes. Fame doesn't just affect the individual, right? It can also have this ripple effect on society. And one area where this is especially evident is in influencer marketing.
Right. We see celebrities and social media personalities endorsing products all the time. But how does that actually work? What makes us more likely to buy something just because a famous person recommends it?
Well, the article from Jury Eye actually delves into this, highlighting the psychological principles at play in influencer marketing.
Okay, so let's break that down. What are some of these principles?
Well, one key principle is social proof. It's this idea that we're more likely to do something if we see others doing it. So if a popular influencer is recommending a product, it creates the sense that it must be good because other people are using it.
Oh yeah, it's like following the crowd. If everyone else is doing it, it must be the right thing to do.
Exactly. And then there's authority. We tend to trust experts. And if an influencer is seen as knowledgeable in a certain area, their recommendations carry more weight.
Right, so a fitness influencer promoting workout gear would probably have more credibility than a comedian promoting the same product.
Precisely. And finally, there's the principle of liking. We're simply more likely to be persuaded by people we like.
So for influencers, building genuine connections with their audience is really key.
It's all about trust and authenticity. And this raises some ethical considerations too. Influencers have a responsibility to be transparent about their sponsorships and to only promote products they genuinely believe in. Otherwise, they risk losing that trust and potentially misleading their audience.
That's a great point. It's like a reminder that not all influence is created equal.
Exactly. And this actually leads us back to the importance of media literacy, something that the Mentes Abiertas article emphasizes.
Media literacy.
Yeah, it's the ability to critically evaluate information, especially in today's media-saturated world. We're constantly being bombarded with messages that are trying to influence us.
So it's about being savvy consumers, not just of products, but of information as well.
Precisely. We need to be aware of our own biases. We need to diversify our sources of information, fact-check what we see and hear, and ultimately make our own informed decisions.
It's like we need to become detectives, analyzing the evidence and piecing together the bigger picture.
Exactly. And developing these media literacy skills is crucial for navigating the complexities of fame and influence, and really just the constant influx of information in our lives.
You know, it seems like we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored the psychology of fame, both its allure and its potential downsides. We've looked at the impact fame can have on individuals and on society. And we've even touched on the ethics of influencer marketing.
It's been a really fascinating conversation.
It really has. But before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about the link between childhood experiences and the desire for fame.
Ah, yes. The article from Psychology magazine suggests that the need for social approval and the longing for fame can actually stem from early childhood experiences.
So if a child doesn't receive enough attention or validation early on, they might be more likely to seek it out later in life. Through fame, through other external means.
That's the idea. It highlights how important it is to nurture a healthy sense of self-worth in children so they don't become reliant on external validation for their happiness and sense of self.
That's a really powerful point. It makes you wonder if some people who chase fame are actually trying to fill a void that originated in their childhood.
It's certainly something to consider, and it really underscores the importance of understanding the deeper motivations behind our aspirations.
This has been a really insightful conversation. But before we go, I have one final thought-provoking question for you to ponder. We've talked about how fame can be a double-edged sword, how it can be alluring and destructive. But what about those who achieve fame without actively seeking it out? Those who become famous simply for doing their work, following their passion, or even just being in the right place at the right time. Does fame impact them differently? Is it possible to achieve and maintain fame without succumbing to those psychological pitfalls? That's something I'll leave you to think about.
That's a great question, and it's one that researchers have been exploring for years. While we don't have all the answers, I do think we can glean some insights from what we've discussed today.
Perfect. Let's dig into that after a quick message from our sponsors. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We were just talking about fame finding you instead of the other way around.
Right. And you know, it's funny, our sources don't offer any clear-cut answers on this, but they do give us some interesting things to think about. For instance, remember that Saybrook University article that talked about the different phases people often go through after they become famous?
Yeah, the psychological roller coaster, starting with loving the attention and then maybe going through phases of hating it, becoming addicted to it, then accepting it, and finally adapting to it.
Exactly. It really makes you wonder if those who achieve fame unexpectedly, if they might experience those phases even more intensely. Maybe because they haven't had years to kind of build up a resistance to the pressures of fame.
Like being thrown into the deep end without knowing how to swim.
That's a perfect analogy. And it makes sense that this sudden loss of privacy and the constant scrutiny and even just the shift in identity could be so much more jarring for someone who wasn't really prepared for it.
But maybe, just maybe, there's also a certain resilience that comes with not being driven by fame in the first place.
That's a great point. If you think about it, the Psychology magazine article suggested that those who are truly passionate about their work might be less susceptible to the negative effects of fame. So maybe that same principle applies here.
So maybe it's less about whether you seek out fame or fame finds you, and more about the why behind it all, like what motivates your actions and where you find fulfillment.
That's a really insightful way to put it. It brings us back to the core idea that true happiness comes from within, from pursuing your own unique purpose and finding that meaning in your work, your relationships, not from external things.
And maybe, just maybe, that's the most important takeaway from this whole deep dive. Fame, it's complex, it's multifaceted, but at the end of the day, it's up to each individual to navigate its complexity, to find their own path to well-being, regardless of their level of fame.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with this thought from Emily Dickinson. She's quoted in that Medium article saying, "Fame is a fickle food upon a shifting plate."
That's such a beautiful and thought-provoking quote. What do you think she meant by that?
I think it's a gentle reminder that fame is fleeting. It can come and go in an instant. And maybe the most important thing is to just focus on building a life that is fulfilling and meaningful, whether the spotlight's on us or not.
That's a really wonderful sentiment to end on. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the psychology of fame and influence. This has been a truly enlightening conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. It's always fascinating to explore the human mind.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring, to keep questioning, to keep diving deep into the topics that fascinate you. Until next time.